I'm really bad at solving coding questions. So I was actually surprised when I got my first big tech offer. I don't think I got to the best answer in any of my interviews before running out of time. However, looking back and having now learned to interview other people, I think I can point at some of the things I did right, even if I failed to write the treasured bit of code that would otherwise open the door for me, including taking out my iPhone on a Microsoft interview to show the app I had built. But I'll tell you more about why that worked in a bit. You might be tempted to cut back on practicing at this point. If I'll never be able to get to the right answers, why waste my time on this? I'm not sure if this makes me feel better or worse, but despite never really getting good, I did practice a ton. I spent countless hours over the course of 2 or so months before my interview studying and practicing coding questions. And I now realize that even if I didn't become really good at this, there isn't really any substitute for hard work. Every other technique I used to turn the tides in my favor during my interviews was built on top of this, of having done my homework and putting in the reps. And we're basically trying to build two things with this: your knowledge foundations and your confidence. For the first one, spending time practicing helps you solidify your understanding of algorithms and data structures, which are pretty much the foundation for coding questions. Not being able to magically conjure up the right answer at the right time doesn't mean that you can't get away without having the foundational knowledge to do so, and severe gaps in this area will be concerning to your interviewer. And as for confidence, when you spend time and effort practicing, you get your mind familiar with the types of problems and the potential approaches to solve them. These are benefits in of themselves, but the key for me is how all of that takes some weight off your shoulders when the time of the interview comes, because you've done this before 1,000 times. Problem solving requires creativity, and creativity requires headspace. You can't give your mind some space if everything is unfamiliar and it goes into fight or flight mode. Practice makes your mind feel somewhat safe, and it gives you confidence because you know you did your part, and that helps you detach your self-worth from the outcome, and that's the state from which good performance flows. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. I'll talk more about this in a second when I tell you about the craziness I did to control my nerves. The thing is that even if you don't become a coding genius for doing so, putting in the practice to solve coding questions has a lot of value in of itself. The outcome might still be a miss, meaning the solution. It's fairly likely to not reach the right one given how complex some of these problems are. But regardless of the outcome, your thought process will be exposed to the interviewer, and it's critical that we win some points for it. I'll talk more about how to do that in a second as well. Let's say you're a violinist. You spent years practicing your craft, and at this point, you're really good with your instrument. Well, as you advance through your music career, you'll quickly realize that there's a big part of the job that doesn't happen when you're holding the violin. It happens when you're looking for a manager, or when you're trying to close a record deal, when you're ideating ways to share your music out on TikTok, and when you're interacting with your audience. Part of the job is telling your story, so that more opportunities open up for you. In our case, we get a chance to introduce our sales pitch as part of the behavioral questions we usually get in coding interviews. This is another thing I need to give my past self a bit of credit for. All the time I spent preparing for this, and it's a really good chance to earn some points and get the interviewer on your side, which is especially helpful if the behavioral questions come before the coding question. I based a lot of this preparation on the advice provided by one of the best books on this topic, Cracking the Coding Interview. I first came up with a list of my 5 most relevant projects for the job that I was applying for, and then for each of those I tried to come up with specific situations that demonstrated certain abilities. Here's how something like that could look. Now, for each of those cells that I wrote, I outlined a well-crafted story that really made my abilities shine through. If you want to do this, you can use the popular STAR method, which stands for situation, task, action, and result, to keep your stories focused and engaging. But I like to take this one step further and add a column for a brief summary. This is really useful because after the interviewer asks you to tell him about the time when you faced a challenging situation in the past, you can pitch the story in summary form and ask them if it sounds like a story that will answer their question before diving into all of the details. This way, you ensure that you're sharing stories that will earn you the most points with them. If you've got enough time before your interview day, I even recommend you spend some time becoming a better storyteller in general. I've been reading an awesome book lately called Made to Stick, and it has deeply changed how I communicate. This is where I went full gas on my approach. The first couple of times I interviewed, I would always get quite nervous. And this of course ruined a lot of the preparation that I had worked towards. I could feel my mind clouded, sort of unable to think clearly, and just being in a state where not even basic solutions would come to mind. So before my final interview rounds, I decided to do something about this. My great idea was to take up solo singing lessons. And I forced myself to take part on a talent show at my university that was going to take place 2 weeks before my interview. My theory was that if I could get on stage and sing in front of over 100 people, handling an interview in a closed room with a single other person wouldn't be too scary. I now know that there's a pretty well established technique for this called exposure therapy. And it involves gradually exposing someone to their source of their anxiety in a controlled and safe environment, with the goal, of course, of making them more comfortable with the trigger and therefore helping them cope with the feelings of anxiety. Now, I obviously did not know about this, so I definitely ignored the gradually part and just went crazy with this. But the point is that I could see how it helped me. I could feel how I was more relaxed and my ability to problem solve was significantly less clouded. This also ties into what we just talked about on building confidence. That feeling of relaxation was also supported by the fact that I knew I had done everything within my power to feel prepared that day. Now, I know not everyone will have the opportunity to do something this crazy, and it might not be worth it for everyone since it could also be a distraction from spending time actually preparing. But some things you could do around this are doing mock interviews online. You could go on websites like cram.com and schedule interview rounds with other people looking to prepare themselves. Spend some time doing visualization techniques. The benefits for this have been proven again and again in the world of sports psychology, and it's been found to influence our confidence and ability to concentrate, reduce our anxiety levels, and increase our sense of control in emergency situations. And practice mindfulness. This is also something I did a lot for my own interview preparation. I would try to at least get 15 minutes of meditation every day, and I found it increasingly easy to ground myself in anxiety-inducing situations and therefore perform better. Okay, so I wasn't able to come up with the best solutions for the problem that was given to me, but that doesn't mean that I stayed quiet or I gave up. I told you a second ago how your approach to solving coding questions will expose your thought process to the interviewer, and this is one key area where we need to earn some points. First, really try to understand the problem. One common mistake is to jump straight into trying to solve the problem. You should spend some time really validating your understanding of the problem with the interviewer. Rephrase it in your own words, think out loud about the edge cases, and come up with a couple of tests to validate the expected input and output. Acknowledge the easy/brute force approach first. Just to get it out of the way, briefly mention to your interviewer how the problem could be solved through some obviously inefficient approach. This will act as a second validation that you're actually solving the problem they're expecting you to, and will earn you a tiny bit of points with the interviewer for being thorough. Brainstorm out loud your high-level approach. I've seen a lot of people going silent when they reach this stage. They've gone into problem-solving mode, but interviewers have no way of knowing how they're approaching the problem in their heads. Do take a second to think and stay silent when you're really focused on your approach, but before internally scraping it and moving on to the next, let the interviewer know what you just thought of and why you're ruling it out. It'll let them know how you're approaching the problem, and it's also a display of your knowledge that otherwise might not come to light exclusively through the problem solution. Be honest and showcase a growth mindset. Once you're a bit deeper into the solution, you might realize your approach will probably not work as you intended. The mistake I made in my first couple of times interviewing was to stick with the solution and try to force it to work even after this realization. Those interviews didn't turn into offers. But the thing is that even in the interviews that did yield offers, I made mistakes and started writing code based on flawed approaches. The difference was that I was now upfront about this and acknowledged the fact that I made a mistake. Not only that, but I communicated with the interviewer and I told them the reasons why I realized it was wrong. If you're not getting to the right solution, this is the next best thing. The truth is that on top of the cold and technical skills that interviewers are trained to evaluate, they're also looking for someone that they could see themselves working with.
We should hire you. Jesus, I'd give you the 25 grand as a signing bonus.
It's a universal truth that not everyone you meet will like you on a personal level, but there are some things you can do to come across as a more authentic and trustworthy person. A very easy one is to just pay attention and listen actively. Your interviewers will likely introduce themselves when the interview starts, and it's a great chance to find some common ground between their role in the company or their experience and your own interests. Using this to craft unique questions tailored for that interviewer towards the end of the interview will help you finish on a high note, and it also showcases your ability to adapt since they know that most people come with pre-established questions to ask towards the end. Another thing you can do is establish a connection through your own interests and experience. This is where I actually took out my iPhone from my pocket and showed my Microsoft interviewers the game I had worked on the previous year when they asked me about it. I was a bit hesitant of this at first, but I now realize that this was a display of enthusiasm and authenticity. Most of my development experience was on iOS, but developing on a competing platform doesn't render you a less valuable candidate, and coping with the slight irony helped me break the ice and establish a more genuine connection with the interviewer. I showed them my game and even let them play with it a second while I talked about how I had built it. Find the reasons that drew you into the tech industry in the first place and try to make them shine through during your interview. We saw this can happen through your stories, your ability to listen by showing curiosity around the problem they just brought, or being enthusiastic about the company and the opportunity to work with them. There are many reasons that might prevent you from finding the best answers to the coding challenges. I know I really struggled with that, but as you can see, there are many other ways to increase your odds of getting an offer when this happens. It all comes down to preparation. And the more strategic you can be about this, the better your odds will be. If you're interested, I have a video where I go into more detail into a lot of the areas that I touched on today. So feel free to go watch that next if you're curious to learn more. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing. I would love to have you on board. And in any case, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.